Perhaps if you think about today's breakfast as a conversation starter, to think about what it means for your practice and for your institutions as well when you look at policies and strategies when you are looking at recruitment, servicing, teaching and learning involving international students. But one of the things that I always come away with from this session is that the expertise is not up here, it's over there, right, with you guys. And what's really important is to acknowledge that you already have a lot of this knowledge, but what I tend to do is to highlight some key areas for consideration as you go about your normal practice. The other thing that's also important is that while we have the tag international students, the reality of what I'm going to be talking about is that it's not going to be just about international students. It's really about us working in a multicultural work environment with students from a diversity of background. You know, students coming down from Geraldton could be just as shell-shocked as those coming from China. You know what I mean? It's, you know, just getting them to lock their doors, for goodness sake. And I know this because, you know, when I first came to Australia as an international student, I actually came to Perth. So if you don't like my presentation, you only have yourself to blame, really. So because I was Perth educated. So I thought I'll start the session with this. This is a bedside table at a hotel, not at a Hyatt, okay? Not upstairs. This was in China, and this was a bedside table, and this one says nightlight, and this one says smallpox, for those of you who can't see, and it's on, right? Have you seen this picture before? No, great, right? This is a great picture. So, anyone here reads Chinese? Yeah? Okay. So this is Ye Deng, right? Literal translation of Ye Deng. Ye means night. Deng means light. Night light. Great. This is Tian Hua Deng. It doesn't actually translate to smallpox, right? You can suspect that. Tian Hua means flower in the sky. Deng, what's Deng? Light. Yeah, remember? Yep. Okay. So flower in the sky, light, smallpox. What do you think Tian Hua Deng actually is?
It's a big love.
The rose, you know, the flower in the sky, it makes obvious sense suddenly, doesn't it? Only if you know how to read Tian Hua Deng. But how on earth is that smallpox? Can anyone guess? No? Okay, so one of the most exciting things when China opened its doors to the West in the 16th century was the Westerners brought with them some very special things like smallpox and sexually transmitted infections. Now, one of the symptoms when you have smallpox is the fact that you get red rashes all over your body, right? Not very attractive. Of course, that's what happens to us normal people. We get rashes when we get smallpox. But if you happen to be part of the imperial family, you don't get rashes, okay? Because they're the imperial family. What do you get? You get little heavenly flowers. Tianhua, okay? You get little heavenly flowers on your body, beautiful, right? Unlike the rest of us with our rashes. So somewhere along the line, someone has equated Tianhua with smallpox, right? So when this comes up as Tianhua Deng, it gets translated into smallpox. So would you like smallpox while you're sleeping? So this idea then, if you think about, this is not just about English, this is about the cultural context as well. Think about your students who are coming here to study and you're speaking to them and they are translating what you're saying into their own language according to what they know. 3 months later, when they are studying for their assignments or their exams or having to go to immigration to deal with their case, they are looking at what they've written down, what you told them, and what they've translated 3 months ago, right? And that's when smallpox happens. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? The cultural context is very important when we are working with students and with anyone from diverse cultures, especially if you are relying on people creating meanings that match, right? We could all be speaking the same language and have quite different meanings to words, right? So another example I can give you there are some words that people just use, that some cultures just use and translate. So if I were to tell you, if I'm in Australia, I were to tell you, my institution did this and so I was forced to do it, so, I just do it. Okay? What do you think the student is feeling when the student says that, and if you're in Australia? You've had your breakfast, right? Feeling not valued, okay? Yeah. The idea of being forced, how does that feel? Sorry? Frustrated? Okay. Anything else? Vulnerable? Oppressed? Annoyed? Angry, perhaps? Now, if another student, say from Malaysia, were to say, my institution had this policy and so we're all forced to do it, so we just do it. What do you think the Malaysian student might be feeling? Safe? Because there's a rule. Yep, there's a clear rule, right? It's compulsory, so it's no big deal, we just do it. Yeah. But the term force has a very different meaning used by the students in Malaysia than the student in Australia, depending on the cultural context, right? So, one of the things that we don't do a lot of in Australia is we don't force anyone to do anything, and very few things are compulsory. It's if you like, would you please? And that's one of the things that I struggle coming from Southeast Asia. We like to force people to do things. But we call it, mandatory and core and prerequisite, and basically you just must do it and move on with it. And so when students talk about, when you're communicating with students, you have to think, if a student is coming from a different culture and using the same terms as what an Australian student might be using, does it actually mean the same thing? We have to be very careful about this because we have all been brought up to remember the golden rule, isn't it? You know what the golden rule is? Treat others how you want to be treated, right? So if this is how you want to be treated, you treat others that way. Great. But in cross-cultural communication, there's actually a platinum rule, okay? It trumps the golden rule. Do you want to know what the platinum rule is? It's simply this. Treat others how they want to be treated. What's the difference? It's a huge difference, right? This is how I want to be respected. I don't want to be respected how you want to be respected. The way different cultures choose respect and display respect is very different. So if you treat others how, so it's this idea that in the early days of cross-cultural communication, one of the biggest challenges when China and the United States were working together was the Americans thought that the Chinese were shifty because they never look at them in the eye, right? Whereas the Chinese were saying, well, we are showing respect by not confronting you directly in the eye, especially if you're somebody who is more senior, right? Because I'm treating you how I would like to be treated. They both went away thinking the others were really rude and shifty. Does that make sense? Whereas if they start to understand how they want to be treated is different to how I want to be treated, that's where you start to look at the platinum rule of thinking, well, how do we negotiate this? How do we understand this? The truth, the reality of the practice that we engage in is probably somewhere between the platinum and the golden rule, isn't it? Because when you have international students coming here, you're not going to say, okay, we're going to give away all our standards and just look at what they need and do it their way. Then they're learning nothing about Australia. That's not useful, right? So there has to be a bridge somewhere between the gold and platinum rule. Because we're in the business of education, it means it's a constant communication and interaction and interrogation of that communication and relationship. Does that make sense? Right? And that's when we create opportunities to explore why is smallpox happening? What does it actually mean? What are you thinking through all of this? Right? Okay. So I think it's nice to start with, what is this business of culture? And does it really exist? Hofstadter, and I know that many people are critical of Hofstadter, but there's some things about his work that are useful and others that are not so useful. I'll talk about what's not useful a bit later on. I'll start with what is useful. So it's this idea that when you look at culture, there are different layers of culture. And when people think about Perth being a multicultural place, when you tell people, you think about culture, all the cultures coming together, what do you immediately think of? Sorry? Food. Food, dancing, and people dress up in clothes that they would have worn 300 years ago, but not now. Right? This whole idea that that is culture. That's the overt example and the symbols that you see, right, on the outside, things that you see. That's interesting, it's good, but what we're really interested in are the values at the very core. And the values is what, they are the things that are actually impacting on decision-making process and how we interact with the rest of the world. And it does not change that quickly. You can change your clothes. You can choose that you decide that you might like haggis and start eating it, even if you've never had it before. It's not that different to blood jelly from the Vietnamese culture. But if you bring it together, people can change their taste of food, but the values are more core to what they're doing, right? So this idea that if you look at cultures from different parts of the world, we are all programmed in a certain manner. And this programming happens through our parents, through our schooling system, isn't it? That's where we're programmed. You know that they say that one of the only times when human beings from different cultures get together and there are no problems is toddlers in a sandpit. Okay? They just go for it. It's all about personality and playing, right? It's only when we start educating them that they start to judge each other. This is right, this is wrong. This is black, this is white. This is yes, this is no. Right? And it's our education systems that imbue them with these values. And in turn, when we grow up, we impact on the education systems that change the next generation as well. Does that make sense? So it's a self-perpetuating thing, right? So our education systems are a direct result of our cultural values because it is the primary means of disseminating our values as a society. You think about Australian classrooms. They are really noisy classrooms, don't you think? Why? What do we value? Individualism. We want people to talk. We want our kids to be confident, outgoing, right? Those are values that we imbue into the system that then encourages that sort of behavior. You're not going to get that in some other parts of the world, right? So the education system is very much a part of our value system as well. Okay. Now, the other thing, of course, that we have to think about is that even when you understand all these things that you see direct right back to the values. Even talking about food, right? Think about your breakfast this morning, okay? You all had your individual plates. Am I right? Why? Don't share. It's just, this is mine. This is mine. Right? Have you been to those formal dinners where they have alternate plating? And then you have to negotiate. It's like a barter trade. Oh, I don't really eat fish. Can I have your lamb? That sort of thing. Do the Greeks have that problem? They have a big platter and you just dig in, right? Right? You think about the Chinese meals, usually round tables like where you are, and there's a lazy Susan there, right? And what happens? You've got a plate of sweet and sour pork, and you share, because those dishes, like sweet and sour pork, is meant to be shared. I don't understand white people who go to Chinese restaurants and order a whole plate of sweet and sour pork and eat it all by themselves. That's how you die. So if you think about even the food that we eat and how we eat it, it is a display of our cultural values. Okay? This is really important. We don't think about it, but it does happen. If you think about the Indian thali, right? We all have the similar food, but we all also have our own portions. So it's a mix of the two, right? And it shows you that everything that we do is a display of our cultural values, even when we don't realize it, okay? And so when the students come to Perth, they don't have an on and off button. They don't switch off what they've grown up with and turn on Perth and go, voila. It doesn't happen that way, right? So what else do we know about culture? It's that we all are differently comfortable with different cultures, Okay, so this is Milton Bennett's work, which I think is excellent because he talks about this idea that people can develop intercultural sensitivity, and to understand this intercultural sensitivity is to understand how we can communicate better with the people from different cultures. Okay, so I'm going to start, and you'll hear this, and you start to see where you might be, and the reality is, we might move to and from. Okay. So these three stages here, denial, defense, minimization, are what he calls relatively ethnocentric stages. And then the acceptance and adaptation and integration are the more ethno-relative. So he's suggesting that we need to move across here. Okay? And there are times when we might go back there, but we need to keep aspiring to this side of the room, so to speak. So, denial. The good news is we probably don't have that many who are in denial in Australia. Denial are the people, there's 0.005% of the world is in denial that there are other cultures. These are the people who kind of just lock everyone out. So if you think about the Amish, for example, or hermits in the mountain, you've got that. So they're actually actively seeking to say no. All right, this is what we are. So we, in international education, higher education, and TAFE, we're not going to deal with that, so we're fine. Good. So let's go to defense. This is the large group of the world. This is a huge part. This is the defense. Defense means that this is almost, these are the people who would say, my culture, I'm very proud of it. Nationalistic people tend to be in that space, right? So I'm very proud of it, and this is my way or the highway, essentially. And how does that translate into education? You will hear people say, all these international students from all over the world, they are paying so much money to come here. So obviously they value what we do here. So why should we change anything at all to fit what they need? Because our way is the best way. There's no negotiation. So if you come here, you need to be like this, right? That's the defense mode. And a lot of the world is like that. This is not an exclusive Australian thing, all right? It happens in Japan, it happens in Singapore, it happens a lot in the United States, for example. So this is how we do it, it's this way, or if you don't like it, you need to go somewhere else, okay? Then there's minimization. Minimization, it's minimization of culture, okay? It's minimization of culture. These are the people who it's actually a very difficult one to deal with because it sounds absolutely reasonable. Because these are the people who would say this: we don't treat anyone differently because we're not racist. Therefore, we treat everyone the same. Okay? Because at the end of the day, we are all human beings. All right? Those statements actually indicate that they have minimized the importance of culture. Are you with me? Okay. What does that mean? Let me give you an example. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story of two different families. So over here, I've got one family. I've got, would you agree that families are important in all human cultures of the world? Yeah. All right. So we're all human beings. We're all the same. Not quite. So I've got this family here. I'll say, my family is very important. I love them very much. They love me very much. And, they appreciate me for who I am. Then they love me for who I am. And I accept them for who they are as well. That's why we love each other. Does it sound good? Great. Let me give you another family a bit further to this side, okay? I love my family very much. They love me very much. We love each other. It's very important. Therefore, no matter what happens, I couldn't possibly do anything that will harm or change anything that might affect any of them. Okay, is there a subtle difference in the two language? Yes? Right? Who's the focus on this side of the family? Every individual has a right to be who they are and what they choose to be. What about on this side? People think about the group as a whole, and the group rights are more important than the individual rights. Now, suddenly, families are not so the same. Even though we are all human beings, you can imagine that the decision-making process of the children in those two families will be vastly different, right? Let's put it this way. A student on this side of the family, if they say, well, I want to go into hairdressing, that's fine. You choose your path, you've got your aptitude, you go for it. You're creative, great, okay? Families on this side, I want to do hairdressing. What's going to happen? But the family needs more accountants. So you go and do accounting. Okay, I'll do accounting. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right? Now, you think about the world, and you think about human rights. You know, most of the world is actually not on this side of the room where they talk about individual rights within the family. Right? Many of your international students come from cultures where it's on this side where the family decides what they should be studying, right? And it comes down to the cultural values. So how can we say that cultures do not matter? Because the decisions made by the kids while they're here will be impacted on by those values. Does that make sense? Right? So if you minimize culture, you are saying it doesn't matter how they make that decision. What's important is we focus on, but we all have happy, loving families. Then we are making decisions at a very superficial level. Do you know what I mean? And that's where minimization becomes a problem. When you minimize the values and say, but we are all human beings. Okay, if we are all human beings and we assume sameness, who are these people the same as? Usually when people say we treat everyone the same as who? Yourself. So actually what you're doing is discounting all other cultures. Do you see where it's tricky? One of the challenges in treating all our students the same is that you're assuming they're all the same, when you all know in education, they're not. They come from vastly different cultures and values and have different expectations. So that's minimization. We then move on to acceptance. Acceptance is what I call Melburnians. Okay, anyone here from Melbourne? Okay, great, okay. I'm from Melbourne too. So Melburnians are very proud of the fact that they are all into social justice, right? They're the only green seat in the whole of Australia. Really, social justice. And so there was a program talking about asylum seekers, right? And so of course, Melburnians are very pro-asylum seekers, right? And so the question was, if there are no detention centers, if we don't have all these other things, where should we put them? And they said, no, we need to get rid of those detention centers. It's really important because it's inhumane, it's all wrong. So when the journalists asked them, so where should we put them? Oh, there's lots of space in the western suburbs. And occasionally we'll go and visit their restaurants. It's fantastic. Just acceptance and welcoming, but you stay there, right? Do you know what I'm saying, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's kind of funny the way I tell it, but there's actually nothing wrong with it because we all want to have our comfort and safety zones, right? The asylum seekers will probably say, well, no, I don't want to live in the city with all you crazy people. So the western suburbs is absolutely fine. Just not a detention center. Do you know what I mean? So it's not to say that that's wrong, but there is a level of acceptance that we can all coexist quite comfortably and accept each other. Does that make sense? All right. Then you've got adaptation. These are the people who then say, all right, we need to change. We all need to change, not just us as hosts, but also them incoming. We need to look at how we adapt and create new realities. All right, and look at our systems and how that can be more flexible and decide what are core systems that cannot change and what are things that can be changed and should be, right? Because we live in a multicultural world. So that's adaptation. And finally, you've got integration, and these are the people who might start a sentence in English and finish it off in another language and dream in different languages. Anyone does that? At home and all that? Yes. So you're in and out of your culture. And in fact, sometimes wherever you go, someone's going to ask you, so where are you really from? Okay, we can tell that you're not really all here. Wherever you go, it's like, where are you from? You go back to your home culture, they'll say, where are you from? Yeah. Right? So they're in and out, okay? And so they're fully integrated. So this is the range. And when you talk to people from each of these groups, the way that you work with them will be very different. Don't you think? If you're trying to promote internationalization of your curriculum, if you're talking to an academic or teacher who is in this space, your language has to change compared to if you're talking to someone here. Being aware of these actually helps us navigate how to deal with change management when it comes to internationalization and acculturation. Does that make sense? right? There are two words that are not listed on this that are important, that is used all the time in Australian context. The two words are tolerance and assimilation. Okay, where is tolerance? You know, it was really popular during the John Howard years, right? We must tolerate other cultures. Where is tolerance? Well, it's not quite minimization because they recognize that you can't ignore culture. You have to tolerate it. So it's right here, isn't it? It's not quite acceptance. We just put up with you because we can't get rid of you. Kind of thing, right? Tolerance. Tolerance. That's the power of language. If we tolerate, we don't have to accept. You know the implications? We have to tolerate you, right? All right. What about assimilation? Minimization. Minimization? Yeah. Yeah? It's somewhere here because we're Australians. If you're American, it's probably somewhere here. Why? Because we have very different models of multiculturalism in different parts of the world. Most countries around the world will say that they are multicultural, right? China says it's multicultural. India says it's multicultural. And they are. India has 200 different languages. You see? So multiculturalism also means different things to different cultures. If you look at American multiculturalism, they use the idea of a melting pot. Yeah, the American melting pot. So a melting pot essentially is this cauldron, this big pot, that has been boiling for 400 odd years. It's been boiling and melted so that you can't differentiate the carrots from the potatoes. It's all just one brown surprise. Right? So that's that melting pot that we all have to be the same. It's all melted together. People have argued that if you look at Australia, our multiculturalism is more like a fruit salad. It's still in a bowl. It's a cohesive dish, but you can tell the apples from the watermelons, from the bananas, and throw in a few nuts, right? Now, if you think about those two images of that melting pot with that brown casserole, okay, and the fruit salad, you can see why assimilation sounds like integration for Americans, whereas for us, assimilation sounds like it's minimization and defense. Because we are saying we shouldn't be able to tell the difference between the bananas and the... No, we don't like that in Australia, right? Do you see that? And so when you talk to people and your colleagues and staff members, and to some of the students as well, they'll come with all these different ideas of what multiculturalism actually means and what it should look like. You know, you've got students from different parts of the world who all think that they come from multicultural systems, right? But our system is again different. So it's not just about working as staff and working with other staff, it's also about changing the student's perspective. Right? How many of you are worried about the fact that some of your international students and domestic students just never talk to each other? Anyone? Yeah, right? So there is resistance. We have international students who come to Australia and are in the defense mode. I'm just here to get my qualification and bye-bye. I don't want to know anything about you, really. That's a defense mode. How do you communicate with them? Right? So these are things that impact on our education systems. Any questions so far? I'm just going very quickly through a lot of issues. All right. So let's then look at, what are these values that have such an impact on the different cultures of the world? Okay. The first thing, of course, if you look at cultures, is that when you talk about culture, you're never talking about individuals, because that's personality, right? Individuals, you're talking about personality. When you talk about cultures, you're always talking about the norm or the average, okay? So for example, if we say that yellow is Australia and red is another country, we would say that, in terms of this value, Australia has lower than the red country, okay? It doesn't mean that everyone in Australia is lower than everyone in Australia. There's some overlap there, as you can see. It just means that by and large, the norms are different. Does that make sense? We are always talking about average. So please, after today, don't stereotype and say, Shanton, say it, okay? That all Australians are like that. So what happens if you've got this? What might be a red country compared to Australia in this instance? England, possibly, yes? New Zealand? New Zealand. You could say that. If I was on the other side of the country, they'll say Perth, but you know. Okay, what happens? What about this?
Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia is not that far apart from us. Even China is not this far apart. Think about Saudi Arabia. Okay, because you also put gender segregation on top of that. The very fact that there's gender segregation immediately pulls us apart because it's a very core value that we don't have. Right? So what happens if you have a situation like this means that if you are looking at recruiting or working with students from those cultures, or if there are cultures that are that much cultural distance, you really need to build bridges. Very important that you have bridges here so that you create more understanding. It's not to say don't work with them, because if that's what you're choosing to do, you have to be aware that there's a huge cultural distance. You need to put in place resources, training, awareness development, and basically building bridges. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So a lot of institutions tend to jump in and recruit from diversity of markets without thinking through what are we doing to the classrooms. All this is just a reality check. Right? If I were to go back, sometimes though, the problems are not there. The problems can be here as well. Right? You cannot treat red as the same as yellow, even when there's a lot of similarity, because the differences here may be what makes the difference between a good experience and a disastrous experience as well. That can happen. Don't tell the Kiwis that they are the same as us, that sort of thing. All right, so what are these values? If we look at values or cultural dimensions, we say that, if you look at cultures around the world, you can kind of theme them along these key things, okay? And this is the work of Hofstadter, who is a social scientist and business researcher, and also Edward Hall, who is an anthropologist. And the idea is that if you look at cultures around the world, you can almost differentiate them along this bundle of values. And I say bundle of values because you can't treat each of these values separately. You have to think, what if somebody is high context but low power but high uncertainty? That would be different to someone with low context, high power. You know what I mean? It's a bundle of values, okay? So let's talk about these values one by one. High context and low context. It refers to the style of communication. And this is saying that if you come from a high context culture, the communication in your culture tends to be more contextual. So everything depends on the situation. And a lot of the communication can be implied. Not what is said, but what is implied. Okay? What cultures do you think fall into that sort of category? Ours? Australia? No. China. Japan is even higher context. All right? India is very high context. Right? If you think about Australia, we're actually relatively low context. You have to make yourself clear. You have to talk about it. You have to discuss. You have to debate. Talk. Lots of talking, right? And that's very important to this culture. It's that thing about how you bring up children. Do you bring up children by saying, at the end of the day, tell mom and dad how you feel, what's going on, what happened today, and all, you can get away with that until they're about 12 years old, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to talk about things. You can always tell us anything. Compared to the other style of bringing up children, which is pretty much and that's all you need to say. Right? The second one is high context, and the first one is low context. You talk about things. Do you know what I mean? Now, the researchers also tell us that no matter the culture, it is argued that the women of every culture are more high context than the men of their own culture. Okay? So if we're comparing China and Australia, we're saying that the biggest cultural difference is Chinese women and Australian men. Whereas there's more similarity between Chinese men and Australian women in terms of how they communicate. Interesting, isn't it? So because you know, don't forget, there is a range. Yeah? So high and low context cultures have an impact on our education systems, right? How explicit is the Australian system? Do you have rubrics for marking competencies, for example? Yeah? In other cultures, it'll be just, well, is it up to standard or not? What does that actually mean? Right? It's a lot more subjective, right? Also, if you think about classrooms and training environments, Australian contexts are a lot more explicit about what you have to learn, what you're trying to get out of this, blah, blah, all those things. Whereas in others, you just show up to class and absorb, right? So these are different styles that you need to be aware of when you're working with your students coming in as well. Any questions? Okay. Let me ask you a quick question. What happens when two cultures come together? Both are low context, and they don't really know each other well. So low context A, low context B, they come together. What happens? They talk, discuss, and talk until they come to an agreement, right? That's what we do with the United States. Lots of talking, okay? What happens when you have a high context culture and a low context culture coming together? One talks, and the other nods and smiles, right? And they might not understand each other, what's going on. Pretty much like how Australia and China is at the moment, okay? What happens when two high context cultures come together? There's not a lot of talking, there's a lot of tangential discussion, but nothing to solve the real issue. Look at China and Japan. It's only been 2,000 years, right? But because they both have a very high context style, they read different signs of each other, right? So in education, what is really important is to make things really clear. And to make it clear, it means that we have to understand that different people coming from different contexts might not understand what we're talking about. We have to make our context clear as well. So being explicitly clear, right? That's why we have marking rubrics, for example. So that's a good practice. Make sense? Okay. So if I keep moving on, the next one is power distance. When you look at power distance, this is probably the hardest cultural value to change in all of us, because it's the very first value that we learned from our parents when we were born. Okay, the minute we were born, we start learning this, believe it or not. Because it's about our relationship with our parents in a way. Okay, relationship to authority. Power distance is the level to which a society or community accepts unequal distribution of power. So a high power distance means that the community and the society accepts that it's okay for someone to have a lot more power than the rest of us. General acceptance, right? Whereas low power distance means that we don't accept a differential in power. So more or less everyone is kind of equal compared to the high power distance, right? So what do you think Australia is? High or low? When this study was done in the 70s, Australia ranked as the lowest power distance in the entire world. Right? In the entire world. So we call ourselves very egalitarian, right? And that's why one of our folk heroes is Ned Kelly. Because he embodies that value, right? Challenging the authority, egalitarianism, larrikinism, that whole idea. Ned Kelly would never be a folk hero in Thailand. He would be locked up and never heard from again. it is a culture shock for me to learn that Ned Kelly was your hero when I first came. I'm like, just don't understand, because you don't have the values, the same value systems, right? Because I come originally from Malaysia, which at the time of this research had the highest power distance in the world. Wow. Higher than China, higher than Japan. And it's unspoken, right? So if you look at power distance, it has a direct impact in the way that we work with our partners overseas as to who they want to talk to, who they want to negotiate, how they negotiate, their willingness to confront or not, or to go behind your back, right? It also has an impact in our classrooms in terms of the level to which your students might be comfortable or not comfortable participating or questioning you in class. How many of you have experienced that before? Yeah? Right. So high power distance classrooms are very quiet classrooms. Who does the talking? The teacher teaches. None of this facilitating business, right? Facilitating means you are an equal, first amongst equal, and you're just facilitating it, you know. Yeah. So there is the difference. And for some students who have succeeded very well in high power distance classrooms, coming here can be a real shock. What is going on? Why is everyone questioning you? They are so rude and disrespectful.
Why isn't my teacher working?
Why? Yes. And it happens in management as well. Okay, if you manage a team of people, the textbooks, which are all American, tell us you need to consult. You do that in China, and employees are going to say, can you please just do your job? I'm not the manager. Why are you asking me these things? Are you that incompetent? Can you see how wrong it can go if you just treat a one-size-fits-all? And this is the issue in our classrooms as well. We need to be aware that there's these power dynamics happening. And so it's about managing expectations. So it's very hard for these to change the moment they get to Australia. It takes a while, right, for them to get comfortable to challenge or even to call you by your first name, right? I've got PhD students who call me professor. I'm not, you know, and they can't call me, and they're older than me, some of them. But because of that rank, immediately you are in a position of authority, I have to call you sir or something, but not by your first name. So, but it goes deeper than that. It's about challenging and arguing and discussing openly. The other fundamental issue that a lot of people don't talk about when they run cross-cultural training is that in a high-power distance culture, if you are the person who is given that power and respect, you are also responsible for the well-being of the people who have given you that power and respect. Right? With great power comes great responsibility. Right. So, in a high power distance culture and classroom, who is responsible for the success of the students? The teacher. Who is responsible for the success of our students in our classrooms? The students. So, is it any wonder that sometimes you have students coming to you to say, but my teacher never told me that I was in any sort of trouble until I got my results. Can you see that? And you go, how can you be so clueless? How can you not know? Isn't it clear? No, it's not. Because if there was something going wrong, my teacher would have warned me and told me and said I need to do more work. Why haven't they said anything to me until now? That's what they've been used to. There are many schools across Asia which are high power distance countries and cultures, where the teacher would give additional tutorials for the weaker students. At no extra cost, and there's no soft marking. The teachers feel responsible to make sure that the kids are okay. Can you imagine our teachers here doing that? Right? Because the students are responsible for their success. This is a big thing that people don't talk about very much. I'm not saying that you now have to take on that responsibility, but you have to manage the transition and say, you know, you need to be aware, you need to look at these things and be aware of it. Okay, any questions from that? Okay. Keep going. Individualism and collectivism. We've talked about this because when I was telling the story of the two families, you could tell, right, that the family on this side was the more individualistic family and the one on the other side was the more collectivistic family. How many of you deal with students who have to do group work? Anyone? Okay. Do you know that group work is a perfect display of people's individualistic culture or collectivistic culture? Okay? How do individualistic cultures do group work? Badly. This is what they do, okay? This is what they do. There are 4 of you on that side, okay? So you're in a group, 4 of you, okay? And then there are 4 of you on this side who are also in a group. Okay, so I'm splitting the table into 2 groups. So 4 and 4. So you guys are the individualistic group. Okay? You know what they're going to do? You do chapter 1, you do chapter 2, you do chapter 3, you do the conclusion. So actually what happens is the stapler is the one doing the group work. Right? 5 minutes before it's due, staple. Right? So page 1, 2, 3, page 1, 2, page 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Times New Roman, Palatino, Garamond, and Helvetica. That is their group work. Because as long as I do my part, I expect everyone to do their part. And if they don't, it frustrates me. You hear Australians say that all the time. They get very annoyed. How is that group work? That's individual work coming together, right? What about this group here, if you are from a collectivistic culture? You know what they're going to do? They're going to say, so what's the topic? The topic is about how do you promote tourism to Spanish tourists, okay, to encourage more to come to Geraldton, let's say, okay? All right, so 2 of you actually have been to Spain. 1 of you speaks Spanish. You don't know a lot, but you like the friends, but you have excellent English. Okay, and this is an assignment in English. So you all decided that because you guys have been to Spain, you will do 60% of the work, right? And because you speak Spanish, you can clarify the subtleties of the language and how you promote it, and you have to help them write it up in English. That's all you do. And make coffee and make them feel comfortable. All right? So 30, 30, 30, 10%. All right? What do you think of that?
That would frustrate teachers.
How comfortable are you with that? But it's group work. They're going to get 1 mark. So shouldn't it be the strongest and best people help and the others do their role and what they're doing? Or should it be the 25%, 25, 25, 25? Which one is better?
The group one, at least they've all been involved in all of it. So they all have the learning experience the same because they've all been involved in it, whereas the other one, they've only learned their bit.
Yeah. But the argument is the 25%, they only learn their bit as well. So
That's
this
what I'm saying, the individualistic group only learned 25%.
percent.
But the group that talked about it together, they've at least, and the one that
Yes.
write it up, that's all involved in all of it.
Yes.
All have had a learning experience.
Yeah. But our systems are not comfortable with that though.
And also, if you have a strategic audit,
Yes.
as far as delivering VET, for example,
Yeah.
when you've got performance criteria, all of a sudden your auditor's going to come in and say, well, how come the 10% is competent?
Yes.
And the others have done
Absolutely.
80%? So that they need tangible
Yes.
evidence that every single person has done the same amount of work to get their competency-based training.
Absolutely.
So as assessors, you've got to be able to prove collaborative working is wonderful,
Yes.
but
But individual accountability. That's right. Can you see, therefore, how our system is set up to favor our value of individualism? Can you see that? There are many parts of the world where group work means you divide it how you think it's best, and then we assess that final thing.
and it's using strengths.
Yeah. So our system favors one. We have to acknowledge that and be aware of that. And so when we put collectivistic culture students with individualistic culture students and say, go, learn, that's when it breaks down. Oh, yes.
And that's the downfall of the multicultural society.
That's right.
Trying to integrate, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, is trying to get the people to work.
To work together, and we don't give them the skills to do it. We don't give them the skills to do it. I know that we don't have a lot of time, but I feel like I need to tell you this story about a project that was done looking at group work and this very issue of how groups come together and what do we need to do to make them work. So they had a subject with quite a number of tutorials. They divide the tutorials into 2 groups of tutorials, right? And what they decided to do was every single tutorial in this subject had to have mixed groups of domestic and international students, all right? And then for half the tutorials, they gave them additional workshops on communication across cultures, negotiation, understanding different group work structures and all that. The other half of the tutorials, they left them alone, right? Very quickly, within a week, the groups that were left alone, what do you think happened? Complaints. Complaints. Why do the Aussies always want to go to the pub? Why are the international students so needy, right? Can't, I'm not the English editor, all that sort of stuff broke down. The groups that were given those additional workshops, and it was only 3 additional workshops, started to work very well together, right? At the end of the semester, who got the higher grades? The groups that fell apart. Because it was usually an Australian girl saying, stuff to a lot of you, I'll just do it. And it was done. Great. But we have a problem, right? We have a problem. So I have a few questions. The first one is, if this whole group work can be done by 1 student, why is it group work? It's like asking 12 apprentices to do French fries. It is an absolutely debacle. Absolutely, you can't. Your assessment task has to reflect the structure of who's doing it. If it's going to be group work, it has to be a group assessment, not something that one person can do. Does that make sense? Right? The second thing is, if you had valued that intercultural interaction and the soft skills, how is it that the groups that did well there were not rewarded for their success in that? Right? Because it's not content. Then why do we bother? If we say that it's important, then, we place our students into industry all the time, and industry says they need these soft skills. It's about time it's reflected in the curriculum and assessment, perhaps. Right? So this is really important. And because if it's not reflected in assessment, we don't worry about it. We focus on content, and so we don't explore issues like this. Right? That's what happens. Does that make sense? Happens a lot, doesn't it? Okay. The next one is uncertainty avoidance. I want to spend a bit of time on this. Uncertainty avoidance talks about how some communities and societies are better at accepting and dealing with ambiguous situations, while others are not so good at it. They want to control uncertainty. Okay? So a high uncertainty avoidant culture is those that do not like uncertainty, and when they see uncertainty, they control using what? Rules, regulations, and more rules. Right? Whereas other cultures that have low uncertainty avoidance will just roll with it. Just roll with it. Okay? So can you name me cultures that are very high uncertainty avoidance? Germany. Great. Germany, Switzerland, Japan, and more recently, Singapore. Okay? Very clear rules. Okay. What about cultures that are low uncertainty avoidance? Italians? Not as low as New Zealand. New Zealand has the lowest uncertainty avoidance. That's why they invented bungee jumping. You'll be right, just go with it. Right? India is relatively low uncertainty avoidance. Okay, you accept and you move on, keep going, right? Where's Australia? We are right in the middle, neither here nor there, and it frustrates the hell out of everyone else, okay? I'll tell you why. If you come from a high uncertainty avoidance culture, Germany, Singapore, Japan, it is very clear, if this is a rule, you are either in or you're out. You follow it, and that's it, right? If you are from a low uncertainty avoidant culture like the Kiwis and India, a rule It's a suggestion. It's a starting point of negotiation and discussion. Okay, even which side of the road do you drive on? It's just a suggestion, you know. It's a point of negotiation, and you discuss and you look at, well, what is the purpose of this rule and what does it mean, and therefore how should we actually interpret it and what does it actually mean? It would frustrate the Germans to hell, right, when that happens. Right, so where is Australia? This is Australia in the middle. Listen, we have very clear rules and guidelines that you must follow, but there are exceptions, okay? You have special consideration. It's case-by-case basis. It depends on the context. It depends on what happens, and we really want to be helpful. But here's the rule. So what does that mean for those who are coming in from high uncertainty avoidant cultures, looking at the way that we deal with rules? They think we are unorganized, and we're like, what is this special? Then there's this, and then there's this condition. It's very frustrating. And for those who come from low uncertainty avoidant culture, you told me there were rules, and I see you making all these exceptions, so are you saying we can negotiate now? So they try to go into negotiate, and you say, no, a rule is a rule. So when people don't understand the context under which we make those special exceptions and special considerations, they start to think, why are you making those? On what basis are you making that? And if they don't understand the context, it could be, is it because they're your friend? Is it because they're Australian and I'm not? It could be any range of imagined reasons. Can you see that? So this is where we need to be very aware of what we're actually doing and what it means for others coming in and seeing how we do it. We think that we're being nice. We have structure, but we have loopholes. We love loopholes, don't we? Because we like to help the underdog, right? The rest of the world is going, what is going on here? It's neither here nor there. Can you see that? Yeah. Right? When I talk to universities, they say, you know, yeah, everything has an exception. You know, even the census date, you know, what do? They just backdate it. Can you imagine them doing that in Singapore or Germany? No way. It's no way. Right? Do you see that happening with your students being confused? Yeah. Or yourself coming from different cultures being confused by what we're doing here? Okay? So that's uncertainty avoidance. So, you know, if a student at university gets 49.5 marks, yeah, right? Should they just be given 50 or not? Depending on where you come from. Okay? Okay. So when we talk about uncertainty avoidance, right? This is, yes? 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay, that's the rule? Okay. If you look at uncertainty avoidance, this is an example of a high uncertainty avoidant culture's education system. This is Singapore, actually. You can all see that this is Primary 1 English, up the back, okay? These are what we call 10-year series books. It is a collection of every possible you can ask, or every possible question you can ask on every possible topic of every possible subject from K2 to year 12. It's not just one book. This is all Primary 1. There's science, there's maths, and all that. That's just Primary 1. All right? What are they trying to do? They're controlling a very uncertain part of the curriculum, which is the exam. The exam. There's one for maths, there's for science, there's for Chinese, for every subject. Every subject, every year level. Okay, it's controlling, yeah? It's not to say that they all do rote learning, because they can do actually critical thinking by comparing answers and going, why does this one fit this question but not this one? And what does it mean? What if I change the answer this way to have that? I'll give you a very quick example. I ran a subject that most of the assessment was a personal reflective journal. Okay? And I had some students say, can we have a model answer for that? Right? I resisted it for 3 years, and the 4th year I thought I'll just give it a try, and I gave, and you know, only one student out of my 500 failed because he copied the model answer. right? All the others didn't. The following year, another group of students came and asked me, it's very good that you have a model answer, but can we have an example of a mediocre answer, a bad reflection, and an excellent reflection? And that year, one girl failed because she copied the excellent reflection. One, right? So if you think about it, they're not trying to rote learn. They're trying to contain and understand an ambiguous assessment structure. What am I thinking? What am I looking for? Right? That's a display of uncertainty avoidance. Okay, so just be aware that that does happen. The final one is clock orientation, and this is really about how we are focused on time. Do you have a lot of students who are from the Pacific Islands? No? Okay. So there are some cultures which are not very much focused on time. So things happen when they're supposed to happen. Okay, just be aware. I wouldn't spend too much time because we're running out of time. Okay. The last thing that is a bit of a homework is just to be aware that there are different communication styles as well. So we move beyond the value systems to the styles of communication. So some styles are more linear. There's a beginning, a middle, and the end in our discussion. Others are more circular. They talk about the context and why this is important, establish credibly before they get to the point. Not necessarily. There are some women who are very direct. And more linear. So that is related to the direct and indirect as well. And then intellectual versus relational are the differences that some cultures can say things like, let's agree to disagree. We talk about the topics. In Australia, right? We talk about topics. If we debate, we are not having personal attacks. We don't like that. We talk about the issue. Right? Whereas in other cultures, all communication is relational, right? If you see their politicians, it's all personal, okay? It's relational. And finally, restrained versus expressive. Can you give me an example of an expressive culture? Italians, all right? What about restrained? Japanese, English, okay? And the thing about this, being aware of your own style and don't be freaked out by the other style. It's just what they're used to. Okay. So this is the end. I have to give you a test. I have to assess your competency, right? So very simple task. Two very simple tasks. One is individual work. One is group work. Very quickly. Individual work. Sit back and relax. Okay? Close your eyes. Just sit back, relax, close your eyes, and all you have to do for this task is to imagine a farm. Close your eyes and imagine you're in a farm. Okay, thank you. You can come back from your farm. Lovely farms. Second task, group work. As a whole group, okay? You can call out the answers to me. I've heard of this thing called an orange. Okay? I know the color. I even know that that's orange, but I don't know what it is. I've never seen it before. Can you describe it to me as a group? Just call it up.
Round.
Sorry?
Round.
Round?
Sphere?
Grows on a tree, sphere, like this?
Yeah.
Like this?
Juicy.
It's juicy?
Peel it.
I have to peel it. It's dimpled. Citrus. I can eat it.
You've got to peel the skin off.
Thank you. Peel the skin off. Okay.
About the size of a cricket ball?
Thank you.
Cricket's a sport that you play with the bat.
Yep. I know that. See, it's strange that I know cricket but not orange. Okay. So are you all happy with this answer as a group?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's look at the answers. Let's start with the farm. Yes?
No.
What's the matter? You don't speak English? Do you see what I mean about a parallel universe? This is smallpox happening, isn't it? You think you know what I was saying. The students usually would think they know what you're saying, but they can be on a different farm. Right? And that's an orange. Has anyone seen this sort of orange before? Did this come to your mind? No, because you're in Australia. right? This is actually a really sweet orange. It's ripe. If it goes yellow, you don't want it. Okay? So I'll end there. Just to keep in mind that the students come with all these images in their heads. When we are working with them, we need to be aware of that. Okay?